This rock has been warm for 4.5 billion years. Not from the sun, not from the Earth's heat, but from energy locked in its atoms since before our solar system formed. That warmth is the start of a story that ends with 440 reactors powering a tenth of the world's electricity. But the strangest part isn't the science. It's how many times the discovery nearly didn't happen. In 1789, a German chemist named Martin Klaproth was picking through a heavy black mineral called pitchblende, ore pulled from silver mines in what is now the Czech Republic. He extracted a dense dark powder unlike anything previously identified and named it uranium. After the planet Uranus, discovered just 8 years earlier, nobody cared. For 100 years, uranium's most notable use was coloring glass a sickly yellow-green. That changed in 1896, when a French physicist named Henri Becquerel made one of history's most consequential accidents. He was planning to test whether sunlight activated uranium into emitting X-rays, expose the mineral to sun, press it against a photographic plate, see what developed. But Paris was cloudy for an entire week. He left the uranium and the unexposed plate wrapped together inside a desk drawer and waited for better weather. When he developed the plate anyway, he found a sharp, perfect silhouette of the uranium burned into the film, in complete darkness, no sunlight involved. The rock was doing it by itself. That phenomenon, radioactivity, would remake the century. A Polish-born physicist named Marie Curie seized the discovery and turned it into an obsession that consumed her life. She and her husband Pierre worked in a leaking converted shed, processing literal tons of pitchblende, boiling it, refining it, boiling it again, through winter cold, with no ventilation, breathing contaminated steam. From those tons of raw ore, they isolated barely a fraction of a gram of a new element, radium. It glowed in the dark, a faint steady blue-green. Curie found it beautiful enough to keep sealed glass tubes on her bedside table and carry samples loose in her coat pockets. Her personal notebooks remain so contaminated that researchers who want to read them today must sign a liability waiver and handle the books inside a lead-lined box. She died in 1930, from a plastic anemia, almost certainly caused by decades of radiation exposure she never once avoided. But what she'd found would outlast her by centuries. Here's where the story turns hard. In 1938, a German chemist named Otto Hahn bombarded uranium with neutrons and split an atom clean in half. He ran the math twice. The combined mass of the two fragments was less than the mass of the original atom. Mass was missing. And mass, as Einstein had calculated 33 years earlier with a formula of almost offensive simplicity, is frozen energy. That missing mass had detonated as heat. And when Hahn worked the numbers, 1 kilogram of uranium, if fully split, released the same energy as burning 20,000 tons of coal. He wrote immediately to his former colleague Lise Meitner, a Jewish physicist who'd just fled Nazi Germany with 10 marks and a diamond ring, and asked her to check the calculation. She did. She named the process fission. Then they both understood the implication. If splitting one uranium atom released loose neutrons that struck neighboring atoms and split those, releasing more neutrons, splitting more atoms, the reaction could feed itself, indefinitely, with no outside energy required, a chain reaction. Uncontrolled, that's a bomb. Controlled, that's a power plant. The difference between the two isn't physics, it's how fast you let it happen. Which brings us to a squash court beneath a university football stadium in Chicago, December of 1942. Enrico Fermi, an Italian physicist who'd won the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1938 and used the trip to Stockholm to defect to America, had assembled a team and built something the world had never seen. A 57-layer stack of graphite blocks laced with uranium on the floor of a squash court under Stagg Field. No containment shell, no cooling system, no blast shielding of any kind. The emergency shutoff was a man named Norman Hilbery, who stood near a rope holding a neutron, absorbing safety rod above the pile, axe in hand, waiting for Fermi's signal. On December 2nd, 1942, the team began slowly withdrawing control rods from the pile, 1 centimeter at a time. The radiation counters clicked faster and faster. At 3:52 p.m., the needle climbed past the top of the chart and held. Self-sustaining. Fermi let it run for 28 minutes, then ordered the rods reinserted. One physicist present, Herbert Anderson, later recalled, "There was no applause, no cheering. Just a handshake and a bottle of Chianti someone had carried in for the occasion, passed around in paper cups. The atomic age had begun under a football stadium, with an axe as the emergency plan. What followed wasn't quiet. Within 3 years, the same physics had been weaponized and dropped on the two for Japanese cities, killing over 100,000 people in days. The chain reaction Fermi had coaxed into existence in that cold Chicago room went 2 directions simultaneously, toward power and toward destruction. And the world has been reckoning with that split ever since. But the reactors kept being built. Obninsk in the Soviet Union became the first grid-connected nuclear power plant in 1954. Calder Hall in the United Kingdom followed 2 years later in 1956. A modern reactor is, simply, a very intense steam engine. Enriched uranium pellets are stacked inside metal fuel rods, submerged in water inside a sealed pressure vessel. The water slows the neutrons to the right speed for fission and carries the heat away to boil more water. That steam turns a turbine. That turbine drives a generator. Today, 440 reactors operate across 32 countries, producing roughly 10% of the world's electricity. France runs nearly 70% of its national grid on nuclear power alone. And every one of those plants traces its origin through the same unbroken chain: Klaproth's dark powder, Becquerel's cloudy week, Curie's glowing bedside table, Hahn's missing mass, Fermi's squash court, and an axe. The ore in the ground right now contains the same atoms it always has, the same mass, the same heat that made a rock feel faintly warm in someone's palm more than 2 centuries ago. We didn't create any of this energy. We just finally learned to ask where it was coming from.